So shall we get started then? So hello and welcome. And I'm saying this really for you ladies who are watching on the recorded video. I know some of you haven't met me live yet. And the ladies who are participating live in the class now, we've all got to know each other really, haven't we, over the last year coming up. So hello and welcome. It's Julie, the florist that teaches. I host Julie Davis flower workshops, the Zoom classes every Tuesday at 12 o'clock. And of course, Flower Start as well, which is my 4-week online flower arranging program, which is the video and pre-recorded video classes as well. Email, I think, did I say email? Online, meaning email and video. I run that phrase out so often, sometimes I don't hear what I'm saying to myself. So we're in week 7 of the spring Zoom classes. So we're nearly at Easter time. And today we're going to be making a wreath. Now, we also made a wreath last week, but this week we're going to be using one of these polystyrene forms. Now, it doesn't matter if you haven't got a polystyrene form. You could be using one of the flower foam wreath forms, but you may find it difficult. We're going to do a cutout, or one of the options will be to do a cutout, and you may find it slightly trickier trying to cut through either the dense polystyrene at the bottom of your wreath, or if you've got one of those ones that have the plastic cuts on it, it may be quite difficult to cut through. I'm hoping to cut through this with my old bread knife, and if you have got these stiff polystyrene or a plastic base, you may well need to get a hacksaw to go through that. So enough about this week. What about last week? And I'm just going to stretch across for those of you who perhaps didn't attend class last week, whether that was live or recorded. The wreath that we made last week was with the raffia on the edge, and with mine I gave it a little extra detail. I'm slightly nervous about tipping this because there's water in my vase, in my test tube, but it's got quite a chunkier, more weighted, more profiled bottom to it because I packed the bottom area out a little bit more. And then I've got my test tube in here, and then my flower. So I've got my it's a white narcissi, it's not a paper white, and I have just actually this minute changed the flower because the one I had put in last week had gone over, and I had this one that was bending over in an arrangement at home, so that has been refreshed. So I've had that hanging actually on my kitchen window, but I think I'm going to move that now to my front room where I've got some dark grey walls. I'm going to take off a wreath I made just after Christmas time, which got orange slices on. So I think these sort of orange slice making extended Christmas into the new year. And I've got away with it a bit, I think, because I was making marmalade. So the orange slices sort of spoke to Seville orange season. But I'm going to put my marmalade door wreath away and hang up this one instead indoors. So before we crack on with what we're going to be doing this week, I'm going to have to hang this up again. I can't lie it down the table because the water will spill. Before we get on with what this week's project is, just a quick word about next week. So Mother's Day is coming up shortly, and I thought it would be quite nice to, not to make your own Mother's Day gift, but perhaps if you've got grandchildren or nephews and nieces and you sort of want to take charge of treating their mums for Mother's Day, something quite simple and straightforward to do that you can do with small children if you wanted a project to do with the youngsters in your life. Something next time you FaceTime or next time you have a Zoom call with them, you could have like a little practical making session. So you'll need some jam jars. You only need one jam jar, but to do the project. But I think, like everything we make, it's always nice that you've got more than one. So I've got a collection here of 3 jam jars. They're just the first ones I came to, all different sizes, different heights, and it's quite nice when you work to do a grouping, and then it looks more impressive than just having a lone jam jar. But if it's a lone jam jar you want to work on, that will be perfectly fine. Now we're going to be putting some edging to the jam jar, and in the worksheet that I'll send out after class today, I've suggested kindling wood. Well, why not kindling wood? We get so used to using sticks and twigs that we're going to be using today. I thought I'd try and encourage you to think outside the box a little bit and perhaps add something around your jar that you might not immediately have thought of. So you can buy kindling wood that's been split up into small strips, or it may be that you've got a load of coloured pencils you want to use. I'm thinking perhaps I've got some wooden dolly pegs with the, the straight up and down ones with the little knob on the top. I'm thinking, if I can remember where I put them, that I may well dig those out. But you want something. We're going to attach sticks, for want of a better word, around the outside of the jar, and then just make a really simple arrangement, and then concentrate on making a decorative band around the middle of your jar as well, just to not really to hold everything in place, because that will be a secret hidden mechanic, but just have a decorative band over the top to hide away the fixing, which is actually going to hold your sticks in place. So I shall move those jars out of the way so we can get on with today's project and come back to the dooring. So polystyrene, it's white. I'm not quite sure how you can clearly you can see that, although I will say on the video things do seem to show up a little bit more clearly than they do me looking in my laptop screen. I've got the container there. I've also got some sticks and leaves, and I have actually got my hot glue gun warming off at the side. So the sticks that I've got are actually olive branches. So a friend gave me some, huge cutting from her olive tree at Christmas time, and I've had it saved outside my back door window. And I thought actually these twigs were nice and pliable. We're going to do a cutaway section of this. Optional, if you decide you don't like the cutaway, you don't need to do it. You can decorate your door in a more traditional manner, keeping it as a whole circle. There's some flexible twigs. It may be that you might have dogwood or pieces of willow, or perhaps silver birch. You might find silver birch perhaps might be a little bit too flexible and not strong enough to stick into your wreath frame. I've also got some leaves. So I have got some fresh bay leaves which smell absolutely gorgeous. And then a last minute addition to my materials today, I've got some oak leaves which I've preserved in glycerin. I've got oak there and some beech leaves as well. So if you've never preserved greenery before with glycerin, it's a really great thing to do, but you need to do it in the summertime, and then you can use your leaves. They go various shades of brown, but you can use your leaves sort of in the dry seasons of the year when we don't have access to very many fresh materials. So that's perfect to use at the moment. We're still on lockdown, so I can use something from my store cupboard to decorate my wreath. Now, on the list of ingredients I suggested that you bring to class today, I did say perhaps a hessian ribbon might be quite nice to wrap around your wreath in the same way that we wrapped the raffia around. And unfortunately, I couldn't find my hessian ribbon. I think actually I gave it away, my decluttering missions, but I did think that I had some hessian fabric, which I was going to cut up into 5 centimetre lengths to wrap around, and I couldn't find that either. So off on the side here, I've got some fabric. This is some yellowy cotton fabric out of my mum's patchworking stash, and all I have done off the main fabric bolt, I've done one snip and then I've ripped the fabric, so it's got a little frayed edge. I quite like that sort of detail around the edge. Or it may be that you might want to add more leaves to your wreath, or that you want to wrap it with wool or string and sort of develop your techniques that you used last week. There's still an outside opportunity that I might add some ribbon to my wreath, and I've got my selection of goodies here that come to class every week. So I have got my gingham ribbons in my pink, yellow and green. I may or may not use them. I've got some strings. I'm going to make a hanger for my dories. I don't know how you hang yours, but when I want to hang my dories on my front door, my little hook's too high up and I need to make a little loop so my wreath hangs down a little bit. And that's going to be the first thing that I do today. So I'm going to put that over there to remind me. I've also got some chunky wool. I've got my old bread knife. That's what I use to cut my flower foam. It's got a serrated edge, so it'll be good for cutting through my polystyrene. I'm going to be pinning my leaves in place. So I've got two options here. One, I've got these dressmaking pins on a little dial thing here that I may well pin those in. And I've also got some floristry wires, so I'll show you how to use those. You can cut those up to make them into little pins to hold your materials in place. I've also got heating up my hot glue gun, and then for decorations, I've got some spring bulbs as well. So these actually don't tell on me. These are the hyacinth bulbs that I dipped in wax in week 1. I've cracked the wax off, cut out the flower head because that's gone over, but it still looks as if it's about to shoot into flower, so I'm cheating with that. I've got a little bird's nest here, and I made that several years ago just by twisting some silver birch twigs around. I've got a little bit of moss, and I have actually got some tiny bulbs out of the garden, and they are going to be, I can just see the shoot there, grape hyacinths. So you've got options there. So I will show you how to fix all those bits and bobs on. And I've also got my little Easter egg decorations. These are like Christmas baubles, but they've got a little bit of ribbon on, and they're little eggs I normally hang on my Easter tree. So what I would do is I'll pack this off to one side, and then I'll bring in my camera so you can see what I'm doing overhead. All right, then let's get going. So here is my polystyrene wreath form. So it's flat bottomed, and then with a nice shape to it. And I'm going to cut out a section of it. Now you need to decide how much you want to cut out. I would not cut out 50% because you're going to find it's going to weaken your structure. And I would think probably you need to cut out, how much is that? A little less than a quarter of it. So it's entirely up to you how much you cut out. And that'll be governed a little bit on how long your twigs are, if you are going to put in the twigs in the missing section. So just don't take out too much, otherwise you'll end up with a wreath that's sort of got a beautiful curve on one side and then maybe sort of slightly truncated on the other side. So it's daring. And if you think actually this isn't for me, well, you can follow along the decorations I'm going to go and leave your wreath whole. So here goes. This will actually, there's no probably about it, will make a horrible sound that will remind you of being back in school. So with my serrated knife, or with your hacksaw, depending on the type of base that you're using, you will need to cut away. So it is. And then coming through, I'm going to go about there. I just want to make sure it's not a quarter. So what I'm going to do is, if I was going to do a quarter, you know, opposite and then a quarter would be here. I don't want it to be a quarter because I think it's going to look too angular. So I'm going to come in a little bit under the quarter, or I guess you could go a little bit over the quarter. So I just don't want it to be an actual quarter I'm taking out, because you'll end up with a wreath that is round. And in floristry and flower arranging, we like things to be harmonious and draw your eye round. And I think once you start sort of cutting out a quarter chunk, it's making it look slightly angular. So this a little bit under the quarter. Oops, there we go. So slide that out, and I would never throw that away. I'm going to put that in my box and save it for another time. So I'll just clear away my messy bits. Brush those on the floor. Now at this stage, I am going to put my little string hook in, because I don't want to forget to do it. And now you need to decide then, when you've completed your wreath, where you want your hook to be. So do you want your decorative, more open section, you know, at this angle, or do you want to have it going round, up the side? It's entirely up to you. Probably the only thing I wouldn't do was I wouldn't have it straight at the top, because you can have problems hanging your wreath unless you're going to use table centerpiece. And I probably wouldn't hang it directly opposite. I quite like this sort of off center. And I always seem to have things off centre on this side, but it's entirely up to you whether you want it off centre there or off at the top. So whatever position, you know, have a think about it. And if you can't quite decide where you want it, perhaps put your hanger on last of all, and you'll just need to be a little bit careful with your workmanship to tuck it away. I'm going to take a piece of string. I don't want this to show up very much, so I'm going to be as discreet as possible. Cut that off. And then match my cut ends together. So I've got a loop and tie a knot. Now this knot will leave you with a loop, and that will be how far down from the hook that you want to attach it. So I know I want mine to hang down a little bit. So from experience, I know I need about that much. And then I'm going to tie it on to my wreath over here. So I will separate out the tails. And the easiest thing to do would be to tie a knot here. but really I want all my fixings to be on the back. So I'm going to turn it over and tie my knot in the back. So it rests on the flat of the wreath form. And if you wanted extra security there, you could put a dab of hot glue. And then the fixing is hidden and it will be covered by all the decorative items that you decide to add on. So I'm just going to cut off those extra strings. I find it helpful as well that even when you're, just helpful to know where the top is as well. So even if you didn't want to hang on your hook now, that you need to mark the top somehow, so that if you specifically want, an area of detail to be somewhere, especially if you're not doing the cutout, that you don't want to sort of be thinking, I wanted a concentrated area here, and then you've been looking at your wreath and moving it around, and then discover the whole lot's gone skew-if. So visually, quite often I just tie a piece of string on where I think I'm going to hang it, and then I cut it away afterwards before I put on my proper hanging detail. I hope that makes sense. But we can talk about that in the chat later. So over here, I have got my olive branches, and I've just tied them together so they didn't get in a mess with an elastic band. So I'm going to take those off. And for ease, I'm probably going to start with my finer pieces of the olive, just to make things easier for me. So what I'm going to be doing is making sure that my twigs are truly flexible, and I need to cut them down in size. So I hold them up to the gap, and it's as if I'm continuing in a nice smooth circle the length of the missing gap, and then adding in a little bit, because I need to make sure that I can wedge these pieces of twig into my wreath base. So I know that I'm going to cut off that stubby bit there. I cut it off here. I'm going to cut at an angle, because then it'll make it easier to push in, and I'm just going to cut down there as well. Double check that they're about the right size. I'm happy with that. And then I can cut a few more using that first one as a guide. Now, of course, this outer edge is longer than that inner edge. So don't get too carried away. So I'm going to start off by cutting my first few at the same length, but remembering you will need to shorten them as you get down. And then you decide how many of these little stems that you want to add in. It may be that you only want 3 or 4, or perhaps you want to go crazy and really, really fill it out. So coming to my middle section here, exactly the same thing, measuring it up, recut stems, double check that it is the right length, and then I can go through and cut more of the twigs to length. So here I've got a side shoot hanging off. I can trim that out of the way and then cut at an angle, a nice point. So let's do a few more of those. So sharp point there, sharp point there. So I think I've got 3 of the long, 3 of the short, and let's just go in the middle as well. So cut off there and cut off about there, and that looks a bit right. So it's entirely up to you how many you add in, up to your artistic direction. You can see here that as I cut my cut through my wreath, that I got quite a clean cut the first time, and it wasn't quite so clean the second time. And that's why I have got my moss, because I thought I would cover the cut edge after I put my twigs in with a little bit of moss. And when I come to add in my first set of leaves, I'm going to get them to overhang a little bit, so it kind of visually disguises these little bits of cut end. So here goes, wish me luck as I go in. So I am coming along and into that mix-up, pushing them down firmly, and then I'm going to have to bend, sort of bow it right the way round to come back in the other side. So hence, not only do you need a flexible twig to continue the circular edge, but also you need it flexible in order that you can lodge it in one side and then bend it round to come back through to the other side. So it will be a little bit of trial and error. And I would say that if your sticks snap or you get a definite bend in it, well, that is the time to, discard that one and come back with another twig to put it in place. You want to get a nice smooth look. So they're going in quite easily because the way that my polystyrene wreath is made, it's sort of little bobbles of the polystyrene, and I have helped myself by cutting my twigs to a nice sharp point. If you felt you wanted added security, you could hot glue these in place, but I reckon these will hold fast because I have I've buried them in, a couple of centimetres, and also that nice sharp end to them. That is holding everything firm in place. But if you're a little bit nervous, it's not a competition to see, whether you can do it without glue. Use your glue to give you the comfort that your mechanics are going to hold. That's coming through like that, and then my thinner ones, shorter lengths in the end, like that. So you can see here that you could start to build it up. I may have cut this one too short. Switch that one out. Push it in like that. So I have got here, I use 6 in the end to spin round. So you decide how many you would like to add in. Now, as I say, I do want to put some moss on the end here. This could be, I've got moss, it could be sisal if you have sisal, anything you like really, or as long as you cover up the cut end with whatever you're going to decorate it with. If you haven't got anything, it doesn't matter quite so much. I shall lean across and just show you what I mean with the moss. So I will feed this in. Cut end there, and will it stay or will I need to pin it? Well, I always like just to see whether it will stay to begin with and then do my pinning and my extra mechanics. I try to get away with as little hardware in my pieces as possible, but it's entirely up to you what you decide to do. It does seem to be holding quite nicely, with bits of moss. Like so. So you've covered up the whiteness. That was the whole point of that. And then as you start to decorate, you need to have a little bit of a plan of what you're going to do. So bearing in mind, if you've got ribbon or you're going to decorate or bind over with fabric, if you want to add in your leaves afterwards, you're going to have something quite sharp to push through both any fabric or ribbon as well as the leaves. So what I'm actually going to do here, rather bizarrely, is my idea is I want the leaves to be on this sort of coming round on both sides, and then I'm going to have an area of quietness, which is where I'm going to put my fabric wrapped round. So I'm actually going to put my fabric over here, and momentarily it will look like it's totally unconnected with what's going over on this side. So again, you could fasten this in place with hot glue if you wanted to. So I'll go to start at the back. I'm going to use actually I've just decided I'm not going to fix that in place at the moment, and I'll tell you why, or perhaps you can guess in the comments why I'm not going to use my pearl-headed pin there. So you can see how I've ripped my fabric, and I'm going to layer the next piece on top to fix it. Now I will use my pin here, and I'm going to try and use a pin. I don't particularly want my pins to show up, so I'm going to use a white pearl-headed pin. It's neatly in there, and the reason, if you haven't guessed it already, why I didn't put the pin in the back was because I want the wreath to sit flat, either on my tabletop or on my front door. And if I have a pin at the back, it's going to not give me a flat surface. And you can see that with my pin that it's hidden because I covered it up with the next bit of fabric that went across. So here to finish off, I might just, actually I don't know if I'll tuck in the raw end or not, because it's got the frayed edges. I don't think it needs to have the tucked in, but again, it depends on what you've got. If you've got something really neat and you don't like these frayed edges, well, you'll need to hide them out of the way. So next up is my decorations. So my decorations here are going to be, I'm going to start with my bay leaves. So I'm going to clip them off and give me a lovely scent. And what are you going to do if you don't have any pearl-headed pins? Well, number one, you would glue them in place. Or number two, you could make your own pins out of floristry wires. You've got those to hand. So perhaps we can have a chat about that later. If you think you haven't got the right fixings, what we could use instead. So lean across and reach for my floristry wires. So what I would do here is the floristry wire is square at the end. So I always, because I'm wanting to pin it into something, I'm going to cut it so it's at an angle. You can't see that, but believe me, I'm cutting at an angle. And then I'll cut another piece that's probably 5 centimeters long, and that's cut at an angle as well. And then I will, you can see that against the white there. I hold it in the middle, I bring the two sides up, and that gives me a little pin, a little sort of hairpin. So I could come in with my leaves and I can pin these in place. So even though I've got the moss there, I still want to have a little bit of an overlap. And I come in with my pin, and slide that into the foam. So because it's green on green, you can't really see it. So that just takes a little bit of time. The speed, I'm going to be using my pearl-headed pins because I can just stab and jab and off we go. But it does look very pretty, either with a pearl-headed pin that you've got in there for decoration, or if you want to hide it. And I think perhaps if I was working, you know, in my own time, I would probably make up my own pins so that these were all hidden. You can see what I'm doing here, overlaying the leaves a little bit, because these will shrink as they dry out. So you don't want to be too skimpy in your placement. And that's another reason why possibly you might want to bind everything to begin with. But you will find it difficult if you're making your own pins out of the floristry wire to get them to go through your leaf and then your fabric or your ribbon or whatever you're binding with. And then as we come along, I'm sort of moving it to the inside and overlapping them again, just bearing in mind that my leaves are round and the bottom of the wreath is flat, so you don't want anything, you don't want too much of that wreath showing underneath. And then layer them up. You just see that my moss has flicked out, but I think that's probably because I'm angling my wreath to show you. So it's flipped out in the corner. So what I will probably do, if it's not going to hold, I will get my wires again, nice sharp point, bend it in half, and then I can pin that moss in place. So hopefully it won't move. And of course you could always put your moss in last thing, depending on how successfully you think you've covered up the end bit. I just didn't want to be able to see the bright white of the polystyrene wreath. And you can see it's quite fun to do this. It's quite therapeutic. You're just sort of tiling this together and deciding whether you want to show off the pins if you've used the decorative ones or whether you want to cover them up. And as they are decorative, I'm positioning my second leaf sufficiently far down that you can see the pins. But if you think, actually, I quite like the speed of the pin, but I don't want them to show, you can just cover them up a little bit more. So again, that sort of little design detail is entirely up to you. Now my leaves, you know, Mother Nature, they're all different sizes, so I can't be ultra precise unless, of course, you sit there and grade your leaves and decide you only want to use the leaves that are all one size. And again, it's that time factor. It just depends on the kind of worker you are. But I can't visualize myself sitting there deciding whether my leaves are small, medium or large. So I quite like it both ways. You'll have to decide whether you want to have your pins showing or whether you want to position your leaves so that your pins are hidden. And then I could then, you know, later on as we make and create, you know, I'll decide whether I want to put in some of the preserved greenery just to add a bit of textural difference. In terms of textures as well, I've got something else to show you, and that is I was going to knit myself a mohair scarf years and years ago. It never got anywhere, and so I shrunk the fabric, and I've never known quite what to do with it afterwards. And I did think actually this might make quite a nice textural detail as well. But I would have to stitch that on, and the way I got these little bobbles was before I felted the fabric, I believe I tied marbles onto here with elastic bands and then put it in the wash to shrink it. And I got this sort of lovely textural bobble effect. But I could wrap that on there. It's kind of making it a little bit Scottish, isn't it, with the purple. It makes it look like it's got thistles here. But I would have to sew that up on the back. So you never know, when I finally come and finish this, I may or may not have added in those extra details. Now, if you want to add in, you don't want to watch me pinning this, so I'll go straight to my decoration. But imagine I've got my leaves here, and then thinking about some decoration. So again, I'm deciding that that's going to be the top, and decoration, even though this is going to lie flat against your front door, I tend to like putting my sort of visually heavy decorations on the bottom because it feels like it's weighting the wreath down. If you're going to use your wreath on a table, you could put them wherever you want. There's little things like this. You could start to build up a little montage. So imagine there's no white here. It's covered up in leaves. My final touch is thinking about where these decorations are going to go. And I've got the options of putting in, I might just take that off, that I could pin things in place. And this is why I love using the spent bulbs. I've also got some tiny fresh ones as well. So I'm going to fix those in place. But you could either thread string through them and tie them on, but I could take another floristry wire and use that to pin pieces in place. So I'm just making sure, I don't know whether the camera will pick that up. I've got it at a diagonal angle, so it's really nice and sharp and pointy. And I can go through and feed my way through my little bird's nest and push it in. Just remember, you need to anchor it down, but you don't want the wires coming out at the end. So you'll see lots, when people are making these, they're constantly running their hands around the back to make sure nothing is poking through the back, because you don't want to have your front door or your wall squashed. So that's held in quite firmly in place like that. I'm angling it slightly, can you see? Because when I come to look at the front door, there's sort of this inside ledge here, so it's not sort of flat square on the top edge here. It's angled towards that middle bit, all the time visualizing what it's going to look like when it's hung up. So it's one thing making it on the desk in front of you, but you do need to think about how it's going to look when it's actually on your front door, or whether the final resting place will be. So the next thing, taking my wire and pushing it right the way through my bulb and out the other side. And that same thing, I can pin it in place. And perhaps here, it might be one of those occasions where you do want the wires to come through all the way to the other side. Because when they came through to the other side, you could then twist them together and then push them back into the wreath base. And here, so that one's a spent bulb, but these are the tiny little grape hyacinths, so they will come out in flower. You could get a little kebab stick or something like that. So here, for instance, I might put my wire in first, and if I felt it needed a dab of hot glue to hold it, and then I could push my little, it feels a bit cruel here, and I got, you can see the wire sticking out, so I need to get rid of that, so I'll bend that round. So with whatever decorations you put on, you need to give it a waggle, and if it falls off on your table, it's not going to survive being outside. So do test your work and make sure it is going to fix and hold in place. So another little bulb here, all the way through. And where am I going to put that one? Perhaps running on the edge here, bending that wire over and sticking it back to hold in place. And then if you wanted to add in your eggs or anything like that, or I could be tying, I'm going to have a little bit of yellow fabric finish it showing. So I've gone for a yellowy theme, but you could do exactly the same thing with your eggs as well. So I would probably hot glue an egg into there like that, or you could string some up together and have them hanging down at the centre. And as I've gone for yellow, you know, I could go through and start to make ribbons and bows too. So just a really simple bow, 2 strands together. And pull on the tails and then tighten the loops. And you've got yourself a little ribbon detail, which you could add in the same way, a touch of hot glue, or to wrap a wire around it and use the prongs of the wire to go through into your wreath base, and then bring them out to the other side to hold in place. So I'm going to bring the camera back to me. I'm conscious that I haven't actually fixed everything in place. We're going to get rid of that ribbon. I know that's not fixed, but I reckon I can hold that in place with my finger. So you can see that it's a bit of a part constructed door wreath, but we are a good way into the class. So you can imagine what I'm going to do when we make and create together. I'm going to carry on with the green and going to overlap some of the yellow ribbon that looks very pale here and do the same here, and then carry on with my little bits of spring decorations. So at this point, I'm going to draw the live video to a close. So we'll say goodbye to our recorded watchers.